In a world where justice is supposed to be blind, there are those who believe the scales are tipped in favor of the powerful. The ones who are meant to protect us are often the ones who cause the most harm. The police force, sworn to serve and protect, have become a symbol of fear and mistrust for many. And the court system, designed to ensure justice for all, has failed time and time again. But there are those who refuse to be silenced, who fight for change, and who demand accountability. Join our host, former Texas police officer and major crimes detective, Justin Carlson, on a journey through the darkness as he shines a light from his extensive 14 years of experience on police injustice and the failed court system. And as he speaks with the many others who have also experienced injustice. This is Failing Justice.
Well, hello, Failing Justice audience. This is Justin Carlson, your host as always, and my trusty co-host, Preston Green.
Hey, man. How's it going?
And it's been good. It's been a minute since we've been on the show. There's been so much going on in both of our lives.
Yeah.
And we're just, I'm glad to be back, man. It's been a minute.
Yeah.
You have since had a baby. Since our last show, because I don't think you were on the last one, were you?
Yeah.
Were you? You were.
It's been that long.
Yeah. I can't even remember. I know you had a baby. Had some stuff going on at work. I've had a lot of stuff going on in my personal life and some changes coming up. So, but it's glad to be back here at Hello Studios in Dallas. And man, we got a really cool guest with us today. We have Aswad Thomas. Welcome to the show, Aswad.
Thanks, man. Thanks for having me on. Excited to have this conversation.
Yeah, man. Me too. A little bit about Aswad. So in 2009, he was 26 years old, and he was just 3 weeks away from going to Europe to play professional basketball. And as he left a convenience store, he was approached by two men, and their intent was to rob him. And he suffered a near fatal gunshot, several gunshot wounds to his back, and that ended his basketball career. But he made something out of that, and so today, Aswad leads an organization and is vice president of that organization, and advocates for survivors of crime and promoting public safety and criminal justice reform, which is what we're all about. And it's like I told you before the show, Aswad, really, man, the person that's best at introducing themselves is themselves. And so I want you to take from what I just said, kind of expound upon that a little bit and tell our audience about yourself, how you got here, your organization. We want to hear all about that. So go ahead.
Awesome, man. I first want to just thank you all so much for having me on today. You know, as you mentioned, went through, a life-changing experience. So in 2009, for me, that was like the highest point of my life, right? I had just graduated from college. I was the first male in my family to ever graduate from college. I remember walking across that stage and seeing my mom have this big smile on her face because her youngest son was the one to go to college and to graduate. Also, that year I was also a very good basketball player. I went to college in Elms College in Chicopee, Massachusetts. So I was a very good basketball player. For those of you that follow sports, my nickname is the Black Steve Nash. So that's what most people say I like. So it was pretty good back in my day. So that, once again, that 2009 was like the highest point. I had just graduated from college, had signed with a professional basketball agent, was looking forward to starting my professional basketball career. Something that I worked so hard at, not just in the classroom education, but on the court, on the basketball court as well. And so that summer, I kind of stayed in Hartford, Connecticut, because I wanted to train. I wanted to play in the summer program there against other college athletes, some NBA pros, as I get ready to go overseas to Europe. For those of you that are around basketball, right, or know about basketball, when you go overseas to play in Europe, you're gone for almost 9-10 months out of the year. When you're out of the country. So I wanted that last summer to spend more time with my family, training, because I knew I was going to be away for, almost 9 to 10 months. As well, I also knew that I was going to be making a living, right? Making a living playing basketball, sport that I love, being able to help provide for myself and my family as well. But unfortunately, August 24th, 2009, while leaving that corner store in Hartford, Connecticut, two men came up to me as I was leaving the convenience store and were tried to rob me. I just remember trying to flee them and run back into the store when I was hit twice in my back. And that experience, I just remember waking up. I remember waking up on the concrete. I was laying on my stomach on the ground. And for me, it was a weird feeling because it kind of felt like I was like having a dream. Right. I had remembered that I had just, walked out of the store. The next thing I remember was like waking up on the concrete. And I remember I was kind of feeling, I was like dazed, a little bit confused, not knowing what was going on. Then I just started to feel kind of like this wet substance was on my back. And I'm confused, like, why my back feel so wet? Why can't I move my legs? Why can't I stand up? And so I was just like confused of what was actually going on. So I remember just kind of reaching behind my back to kind of feel what that wet substance was. And then when I looked at my hand was full of blood. And that's when it hit me that I had got shot. And so in that moment of, realizing that I was shot and being outside on this cold concrete, not being able to move my legs, not be able to stand up, I thought that whoever had shot me was going to finish the job, was going to be, standing right above me, to try to, to kill me. And I used like the little strength that I had in my body to crawl back into the store. And I remember crawling back into the store and just yelling, at the store clerk, was like, hey, I got shot. They trying to kill me. I got shot. And the next I remember, just everything just went black. As I recall, next time I woke up, I was in the ambulance. And I remember being in that ambulance, once again, everything just felt like a slow motion dream to me. I couldn't comprehend what was going on. I just remember I was just kept saying to the paramedics that, I don't want to die. I don't want to die. Because, when you watch movies, they tell you to stay alert. They tell you to keep your eyes open. So I tried to kind of just stay alert, kept saying, I don't want to die. I don't want to die. And then I was, felt myself being transported from the ambulance into the emergency room on a gurney. And I was still confused too, right? I was like, is this happening? Am I in a dream? I just remember being, pushed into the emergency room with these huge, big, bright lights above me. And I just seeing so many doctors and nurses just coming over to me, they're, cutting my clothes open, they're, sticking me with tubes everywhere. And as I'm like, kind of just like watching everything happening, I just didn't feel like it was real. I thought I would wake up from this dream. And then I guess I lost consciousness again. And, the next thing I remember is waking up again. When I woke up, there was a doctor who was, right next to me and said, Mr. Thomas, I have to tell you that you were shot twice in your back. And at the moment, we don't know if you will be, to walk again. And my immediately thought was about basketball. My immediately thought was, something I worked so hard for, that there was a potential opportunity that I won't be able to play basketball. And that's when I just like broke down. That's when it really hit me that I had became a victim of gun violence.
Wow, man. So this was in 2009. Now, how old were you then?
Yeah, I was 26 years old.
26, that's right. And that's pretty wild, man. I can't imagine that. I'm sure that was extremely scary. Mm-hmm. So what was your recovery process like? Like once you woke up, the doctor was telling you what was going on. So how long did that take, and what did you have to do?
Yeah, I'm still recovering, if I could be honest, physically, also mentally as well. So I was in a hospital, I suffered 2 gunshot wounds to my back. One of them one bullet was an inch away from my spinal cord. Another was an inch away from my aorta. I had 2 collapsed lungs. My shoulder was dislocated. I was also suffering from internal bleeding as well. So I was in a very, very bad shape. And I was at the hospital maybe a week or so. And I remember being discharged from that hospital. I remember during the discharge process, my doctors and nurses telling me about the physical challenges that I would have to recovery. So I was mindful of the physical challenges that I would have in recovering from the shooting. I wasn't paralyzed, and I was able to, move my legs, and there wasn't no severe injuries as relates to me being able to walk again. So that was good progress. So I was discharged from the hospital back into the same neighborhood where I was shot. And for me and for so many victims, that was also a very traumatic experience, because they told me about the physical challenges that I would have, but they never mentioned kind of like the psychological effects of being a victim, dealing with the PTSD, the flashbacks, the nightmares, the depression, the stress. And I was, just going through this new experience of being a victim of gun violence. So as I was recovering from that shooting, which was on my mother's 1-bedroom apartment in Hartford, Connecticut, my recovery was in the living room on her couch, for almost 9 months recovery process. And during that time of me recovering and going through a lot of PTSD, afraid to leave the house. During that time, law enforcement did come to visit me several times. And each time they came to visit me, primarily it was all about the case, rightfully so. So they were investigating the case. I remember them, asking me, questions like, like what was I doing outside? Did I get any conflicts with anyone? Is this, related to like any gang activity? And, I was like, I'm a college graduate, right? I've never been in trouble my entire life. I'm a star basketball player. And the questions was always about the case. Through those interactions with law enforcement, they never asked me how I was doing. They never asked me how I was doing. They never told me about a victim advocate, which I think most law enforcement police departments have a victim advocate that's supposed to work with crime victims like myself. So they never told me about a victim advocate who could help me access mental health services. And so I was, my family and I was like left to deal with this incident on our own. And I think that was a challenging process for me, being a victim and not being able to access counseling or mental health services as well. And like that experience, kind of like, hey, I have to recover some way, somehow on my own. And it wasn't through the justice system process. It wasn't through victim services, which I know so many crime victims also have that same similar experience as well.
Yeah, so you touched on it. I was going to ask you, what, like when your first interaction with law enforcement was and kind of how it was. But, I think, and I always look back on the cases that I worked. I've been present for a lot of different victims, like during their actual surgeries. I've seen bullets removed from bodies, doctors handing over those bullets as evidence. And, and things like that. And you get so, and I mean, it's an important aspect, but I think you get so focused, like tunnel vision, especially on the law enforcement side, you know, as a like major crimes detective who worked those things, like, you know, you're like, okay, who did this? We want to find out who it was because we want to put them behind bars. And then I think where we fail, and I say we, I'm not a cop anymore, man, but obviously I was a cop for so long. That's just kind of how I talk. But like, I think law enforcement fails to go further and like, oh, well, they think once, okay, so I've got the information. We know who it was, you know, our job's over. And I think that's one thing that Preston and I both advocate for is, you know, put the, you talk about humanizing the badge, like put the human side into things and say, okay, like, this is a person, you know? And one thing that you said too, that I thought was interesting, was they immediately went to, oh, was this gang violence? Assuming maybe because you're a young black male and you're a victim of a shooting in this particular neighborhood. Oh, well, this has to be gang related. Like maybe those other guys are gang members, but that don't mean I'm a gang member. So you really said some things that kind of interest me. And I think, as law enforcement, because we have a lot of law enforcement, that listens to the show, like law enforcement has to do better at humanizing that badge and going, above just, you know, solving the crime. I don't know what your thoughts on that are, Preston, but that's kind of, when he said that, that's kind of where my mind went.
Yeah. I think sometimes we get so focused on, you know, everything just being routine, right? So, it's, don't know so much if it's just focused on like we got to ask these questions so that we can work this case and try to get some justice for the victim, or if it's just like routine, like, okay, it's just another day in the office. But there is a strong need for compassion in this profession, and on the job, like, you know, we're supposed to be the protector, the counselor, really anything, you know, our sole mission is just to serve, you know, so that encompasses so much, man. Your story and, what you went through, one, you know, I want to commend you on your courage to tell it, because that's got to be a lot. I can only imagine, you know, every time you tell the story, you know, you're having to go back and relive that. You brought up a couple of things about mental health and, you know, not just the physical recovery, but the emotional and traumatic recovery that you have to go through. So, you know, I commend you and the courage that you have to tell that story over and over and over again. And that also goes to show like how much work you did to get there, you know, because a lot of people, I would imagine a lot of people that, you know, deal with any type of trauma, but an incident that like you went through, they, you know, wouldn't be able to tell that story 20 years later for the first time, you know, and it sounds like, you know, we haven't gotten into it, but you're, the organization that you're a part of, you know, you strive to better the system, you advocate for victims, and through that, I can only imagine how many times you've had to tell your story. So I appreciate it. I value that you told it to us. You chose us to listen. And, you know, I hate that it happened. But it seems like you're able to use that, right? And that's like your vehicle for change. And so that's powerful. So I just wanted to commend you on that.
Thank you. Appreciate
26
that.
years old and this happening. I mean, I'm only 29, and you had your life. It seemed like you had your plan laid out, your roadmap, and then it's just halted immediately, and not by your own doing. Did you ever feel anger?
Of course. It's been a long journey for me to get to this point, right? When you are a victim, and it's a human reaction, right? It's natural, for you to be angry, and you should, right? Harm was caused to you that not only impacted you, but also impacted your family as well. So I went through so many emotions, and through this entire process, I think there are two moments that really defined how I look at this issue of the justice system and victimization as well. So it's 2 months I touch on, and these two moments are related to the two people that shot me, right? And so when I was shot, there were two young men who were involved in that shooting. One was 18 years old at the time, and one was 19 years old at the time. So during my doctor's appointment, about a year after I was shot, the bullets were still in my back, right? And so during this process of having my last doctor's appointment to remove the bullets out of my back, as I'm having surgery, I remember, I was conscious. I don't know how my doctor had me awake while he's
that's wild.
Surgery, right? But I was conscious, right? And I couldn't feel anything, but I could hear the conversations, right? So I remember my doctor, as he's standing over me and got the scalpel, he's like cutting in my back. He's like, digging in my flesh to pull the bullets out. He started to say, Mr. Thomas, like you remind me of, this kid, this kid who had treated 4 years ago. This kid was 14 years old. He was from my neighborhood. This kid was shot at the age of 14 years old in his face. And as a result of that shooting, he lost sight in one of his eyes. So my doctor shared more details about this young man. So as I'm like on the operating table, for some reason, like my heart just starting to beat fast, right? And I was like, what's going on? Like, why is my heart beating so fast? And it was because the more details that my doctor shared about that teenager, I was realizing that he was describing one of the teenagers that had shot me.
No way.
Yes.
Wow.
Right.
Really?
Yes. And so as I was realizing, I said, hey, Dr. Marshall, like, can you pause? Because I got to tell you something, right? I want to tell you that the person who you just described, and I knew it because all of his physical characteristics, right? I knew it because the patch that he wore on his eye that night, right? And it was like, Dr. Marshall, I got to tell you that the person who you just described is one of the teenagers that shot me. And I remember my doctor, it's the first time I've heard this term. My doctor was like, this is how the cycle of violence continues, right? Because just like me, being released from that hospital back into that same neighborhood with no help, no services at all, right? Just like me, that same hospital released that same teenager back into that same neighborhood with no help, no mental health services, no counseling, no therapy, no housing relocation support to help him get away from that violent neighborhood where he was a victim. And I could, I was 26 years old when I got shot. I couldn't have imagined what that 14-year-old was going through, having to live back in that same neighborhood where he was shot. And also now he had a physical disability because he lost sight in one of his eyes, right? So I know how much trauma, how much anger, right, that teenager was going through. I can imagine what life was like for him. And, and I strongly believe like that unadjusted trauma that he was going through played a huge role with me getting shot years later. Because what happens when you actually don't provide the resources, the services to help people heal, there are a few things that happen. One, they end up becoming victims again. People become victimized. Two is that it often leads to people to be, mental health issues, drug and substance abuse issues, physical health, the PTSD, right? All of those symptoms that comes with being a victim. When you don't treat that, it just had very, very devastating consequences to victims. And then the third thing, what often happens that when you actually don't provide victim service, also lead people to come in contact with the justice system as well through this victimization to incarceration pipeline, right? So when I learned about that teenager's experience, that really kind of changed my thinking about, about this cycle of violence that continues in communities where most people who experience crime and violence, especially as it relates to like gun violence, don't get any support. It causes people to lash out, cause people to to become perpetrators, right, in a crime in the near future. So that's one thing that got me thinking about that teenager. And the second thing, which got me to doing the work that I'm doing, working with survivors across the country and making sure that our experiences are at the center of public policy making, is, the other teenager was 19 years old. So this teenager did get arrested for that shooting. And I remember the first day of trial. For me, growing up in a neighborhood, into my basketball career, the first day of trial, I was extremely nervous. I was nervous. My mom had to go to work, so she just dropped me off at the prosecutor's office. And I didn't have any support on the first day of trial. I'm thinking about, me going upstairs to testify. I'm thinking about who's going to be, in the gallery of the courtroom. I'm thinking about seeing the person that was arrested for shooting me for the first time, just going through so many emotions, right? And was very, I was terrified, that first day of trial. And I remember kind of, being in the prosecutor's office, my detective was there as well. And they kind of walking me through the process, right? Mr. Thomas, thank you for coming in to testify. Here's what to expect. You're going to go upstairs. There's going to be a judge. There's going to be a jury. There's going to be people in the gallery. Just walk me through the process. And for me, I just kept getting extremely nervous, right? Because I actually didn't want to face the person who had shot me, who had ended my basketball career either. So I remember kind of, asking the prosecutor, I said, how much, can you, how much time is he facing? Like, can you tell me a little bit about him? And I remember the prosecutor and my detective was like, one, he was known to law enforcement. I remember the prosecutor saying, like, he's so different from you. Like, look at you. You're a college graduate. You're the star college basketball player. You had a lot of things. Your dreams are coming true. But the person that shot you was so different from you, right? He could barely read or write. He was known to law enforcement. He dropped out of school at a very young age, right? And it would just kept saying, like, he's so different from you. And and I'm thinking, I'm like, man, like, how was he so different from me? Like, we grew up in the same neighborhood. We're probably
he got shot at 14.
Right. And I was like, maybe I was just a good basketball player, right? Maybe I was just a better basketball player that provided me opportunities that this other young man didn't. So I remember asking him, like, how much time is he facing? I remember the prosecutor was like, well, if we got a lot of evidence, with your testimony, if he's found guilty, probably will be facing up to 40 years in prison. And that right there, y'all, that hit me. I was like, man, 40 years in prison at the age of 19 years old. Like, my oldest brother is incarcerated. He's serving a life sentence without the possibility of parole. So I know, like, the devastating impact that a long-term prison sentence could have on an individual and also, people's loved ones as well. And, I didn't want to put him through that. I didn't want to, put him through this long-term prison sentence. So I remember, kind of like, I'm kind of like stalling because I still didn't want to go upstairs and testify. I remember asking him, like, I watched a lot of Law and Order growing up, right? So I remember asking the prosecutor, like, did you offer him a plea deal? And it was like, yeah, we offered him a plea deal twice, Mr. Thomas. He turned down a plea deal twice. And I was like, man, I'm like, I guess I got to go upstairs and testify, right? And, right before we left to go upstairs, I remember asking the prosecutor, I said, hey, can you, can you just go there and just offer it to him one more time for me? And they left out the room. They came back like 5 minutes later and was like, Mr. Thomas, he accepted the plea deal. And this plea deal will be, instead of, potentially being found guilty and facing up to 40 years in prison, that this 19-year-old will be sentenced to 6 to 10 years in prison. And when I heard that, it was just so much relief that just came over me. Right, I was smiling in the inside because I didn't want the prosecutor, my detective, to see that I was smiling, because I felt so good about that process. I felt good about that process because, one, I had accountability. I knew that this teenager would face the consequences of being involved in my shooting, but I also knew that I didn't want that teenager to be spending 40 years in prison. Knew that with him, being sentenced 6 to 10 years, my thought then was like, maybe, he come home before he's 30 years old, and being able to be a productive member in society as well. And so still today, I don't know if that young man knew that, one, I did forgive. I forgave both of them who was involved in my shooting. But also, I don't know if that young man knew that I advocated for him to take a lesser sentence as well. So those were the two things that really got me to really working with survivors all across the country. And you might think my story is unique, but so many survivors across the country have those same perspectives about the justice system. Instead of long-term prison sentences, we want more focus on shorter prison sentences and rehabilitation as well.
Wow. Well, I tell you, I say this to Justin every time we have a podcast. I say, I go into the podcast before we start recording, or, I think about the last one we did, and I'm like, okay, I think we got it figured out. I think I've got an opinion or a route we can go and take to fix this thing. Or I think I understand it a little bit better. And then we get into the next one, and I'm like completely, my OODA loop's thrown off again, and I'm like, all right, I didn't think about that aspect, because there's a couple things that you just brought up. I'll tell you the first one, and I've said it on this show. I've always had a stance. I don't like plea deals. I have probably an unpopular opinion on them. But it's always been from the perspective. This is crazy. I'm so glad you're on this show today. It's always been from the perspective of, I've come to that conclusion because of all the stories I've heard of wrongfully convicted people. And a lot of that can kind of be attributed, I think, to plea deals. I've never heard a victim's perspective of a plea deal, and what you just described, and why you advocated for it, because everything you advocated for makes sense. Going back to talking about the cycle of violence, and I've just never had that conversation with somebody regarding the cycle of violence geared towards, gun violence, or really anything other than family violence or childhood trauma, because it's the same concept. A child who experiences violence in a home or has a traumatic event, they're going to go, one of two things is going to happen. It's going to repeat. They grow up. They're very likely to become the aggressor, right? And because that's what we do as children. Our brains are incapable of building the coping mechanisms to work through that trauma. And so as you grow older and you get into your 20s and 30s, 40s, if you've never dealt with the trauma that you had in your life as a child, you're going to handle it the same way you would as a child. It's like reprogramming the brain And that's where trauma therapy and all of those resources and support comes into play and is so crucial for anybody who deals with a traumatic event. One is to help them to work through it, but I can, from a personal, things that have happened in my life, it's, I had to work through some stuff in my life from when I was a child so that I wouldn't become that. Right. And I think that's kind of where you were going with, this 14-year-old kid got shot in the face. And 6 years later, what'd he turn around and do? It's that cycle. And I've never looked at it that way. And I appreciate it because, yeah, I think we've been looking at this thing the wrong way the whole time, as far as, having victim advocates that can prevent violence further down the road. It's not always just about protecting the victim from the aggressor. It can be about preventing the victim from becoming the aggressor, especially at a younger age. I don't, sorry, I get on a rant sometimes, but, yeah. What's your thoughts?
No, you're spot on, right? And what when you look at, our country, right? We've tried to lock people up as a way to stop crime from happening, right? And it doesn't at all. Like since the 90s, we've passed over 32,000 laws across the country, and majority of those laws were at times very punitive and very tough on crime as a way to stop crime from happening. Also, what they say is to protect victims, right? But most victims aren't protected. And what we see is that when you talk to, so our organization, we talk to thousands of crime victims across the country. Majority of crime victims prefer a justice system that focus more on rehabilitation and shorter prison sentences rather than locking people up for a long time, right? Majority of crime victims do not access any type of victim services. In fact, 96% of crime victims do not access their state's victim compensation program, which pays for things like counseling, therapy, funeral, burial expenses for people who lost their lives to homicide. 96% of victims do not access victim compensation or any type of victim services, right? And so what you have is this victimization to incarceration pipeline. Right. We also did a study where we talked to thousands of people living with old criminal records who came in contact with the justice system. What we found was that 9 in 10 of those individuals that have a criminal record have been a victim of a crime. And the majority of them have been a victim of a crime long before they came in contact with the justice system. Right. So that trauma that they have experienced at some point in their life went unaddressed. And that often causes people to become victims again or coming in contact with the justice system. So this is why it's important for us to invest in those safety solutions to help stop violence from happening. It's like preventing crime from happening in the first place and investing in the safety solutions like community violence intervention programs, drug treatment, mental health programs, things like trauma recovery centers to actually help people heal. Like that is the best form of crime prevention that we have out there, but we just aren't investing in those type of solutions as a way to stop cycles of violence.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you hear it all the time. They say hurt people hurt people. So victims victimize, right? And I agree with Preston. It's like, as I'm sitting here listening to this, I mean, several things I want to say. I'm going to try to get them in order here, but I want to go back to you being on the operating table. That's wild, man. That's wild that doctor would bring that up while you're laying there, and it be the very person who was involved in the crime, that made you a victim. That blows my mind. That's like something out of a movie, right? So that was, I think, kind of divine and from a power much greater than we are, to be honest with you. And then the next thing is, I have to commend you. That is a very amazing thing for you to want to advocate for the person that was involved in shooting you and ending your basketball career, to get a lesser sentence, and for you to have that insight and wisdom at such a young age to think about that. Because we got people in the legal system, judges, district attorneys, then we have people on Capitol Hill, lawmakers, state legislators, like cops, who cannot process it. I can't tell you. And it was like sitting here and just this, like you see in like a cartoon, like this window opens and this bright light comes shining through. And that's why I agree with you. Like, I never have looked at it from that perspective. Especially when I was on the job. When I was on the job, I can tell you, it was all about screw this guy, throw the book at him, give him everything he's got. He's been doing this forever. He's a frequent flyer. And we never stop to think, why? Everybody talks about, why is this person doing this? Oh, he's just never going to learn. But we're looking at it the wrong way. It's always, now, don't get me wrong. Obviously, there are people who need to answer for their crimes and people who need to probably be in prison the rest of their lives. I think we can all sit here and agree on that. And anybody listening to this would probably agree on that. But I think we just, and I say we, those in the legal system, we're not digging deep enough to hear those stories and to sit back and understand, okay, this person was a victim at 14 years old. He got shot in the face. This is the life that he's known. What do you think is going to happen when you take somebody like that and you throw them in a cage, right? And they're in a cage on a cell block with, hundreds and thousands of other hardened criminals who've done horrible things. And let's just say they get back out. And we've had people from, I think about Cheryl Morris that we had on the show from the New York Department of Corrections. That's why treatment facilities while in prison is important. Education while in prison is important. Because, and this is one thing I think Preston and I have really come to realize over the last several years is that, and we weren't taught this, right? We had to learn this through, I don't know how we learned it, to be honest with you, but just because somebody commits a crime doesn't mean that they're done, right? I mean, we know we've met so many people who have gone to prison or jail and have turned their life around, man. And it's like society, I feel like most of society says, let's just lock them up. That's where they belong. And then we're surprised when they get out and they go right back to doing what they were doing before because there was no intervention. Nobody, and I'm just going to say it because this is my show, nobody gave a shit to intervene and say, hey, let's let's talk to this person. Let's treat this person like a human being. Let's see what they are capable of. Now, obviously, you can't do that to everybody. I think we can all agree with some people. Just you're not going to change, but I just think it's about giving those opportunities. And especially as cops, I can tell you, we're not taught that, man. We are taught to be what we talked about in the beginning, to be that, to follow our SOPs and to be procedurally driven, and let's go out here and solve this crime and move on to the next because we have so much, and screw this person. You know, we got the warrant, they got the high bond. Who cares what happens at this point? And then you send them over to another entity, which would be the district attorney's office, and they have the same thought. Oh, well, we're looking for a stat for a conviction, right? We need this conviction. It's going to boost our numbers. It's going to get us funding. So let's do this, right? Throw them away. And it's like, just hearing your perspective on that, man, like I think that's really cool and very noble, that what you did there. And I'll be honest, I hope somebody listens to this and kind of takes in what we're saying, because this just isn't talked about enough. And I can tell you too, and I'll shut up and let somebody else talk. When this has been brought up in my past on the job, when you hear people talk about, intervention, and you just, as an embedded cop who is in a culture where that's not popular, you just kind of brush it off. Like you hear it, because I think back of all the times I have heard it or on the news, or it's like, oh, those people, they don't know what they're talking about. This is, he's a criminal. He needs to go to jail. But just hearing this and your perspective and really talking about it and opening up and peeling those layers back, like, man, it just makes me have a heart for those victims, right? I mean, it's a lot to unpack, really.
Yeah, no, for sure. There's just so many. There's so many things that we could. I think as a society as a whole, one, I think to change this entire, to change the problem, to influence change, society as a whole has to get in a better place as far as, we're so torn apart. So it's like we at some point, either we're going to have to come together, come to the table, everybody come to the table, sit down, talk about the problem, say, hey, we have this problem. How are we going to fix it? Or it's just going to get worse. The cycle is just going to repeat and repeat and repeat. That's how it works with think about with victims. Like, if you don't intervene, then something bad's going to happen. That's the way we're kind of programmed to, I keep thinking about everything that we're talking about just kind of brings me back to what I was taught about how to deal with family violence. And it's like, well, we're taught and required to deal with family violence this type of way. Why are we just not dealing with all violence that way? At the end of the day, the psychological aspect of it has to be damn near the same, right? Like,
yeah.
If you're going to hurt somebody, you're going to hurt somebody. Like something inside of you is driving that anger and that willingness to just inflict pain on somebody else. Whether you're doing it to a family member, whether you're doing it to a stranger on the street, whether you're doing it, because you got in a bar fight, or whether you're doing it with a gun, or whether you're doing it because you are a part of two different organizations that are going to fight over turf, or whatever it is, it's all like the psychological aspect of it is it's got to be like the root of it's got to be the same. And maybe we just need to start attacking it that way. And I'm a firm believer that, the only way you're going to influence positive change is with compassion and vulnerability. right? And yeah, we all know, we can all agree that our legal system is not designed to deal with that.
Mm-mm.
Nor do they want to.
And we say it all the time. We talk about, I think you go back and listen to so many of our episodes, we bring up the word heart, right? Like, I watched all these congressional hearings on TV, and the problem is I feel like everybody wants to freaking be right. They want to be right in what they're saying, and they're not going to hear any other perspectives other than their own. Like, I'm right. What you're saying is wrong. And I'm going to sit here and try to make a fool of you because I know there's cameras on me. And, this is a bipartisan issue, and, we're going to prove our point. And I think when it comes to crime intervention, what Aswald's bringing up, it's the same thing. Going and sitting and trying to change this and introduce these things to legislation and bring the change. You just have so many people fighting against it because they're so closed-minded and things have been done the same way over and over and over and over. And it's so hard to change those mindsets, whether they be Republicans or Democrats. I don't care. But I'm just saying, like, that's what I see, where everybody's so divided. This party wants to be right. This party wants to be right. And you mentioned it, coming to the table. If everybody would just shut the hell up and let's come to the table and with heart and say, listen, we all want good here, right?
Right.
But I feel like that's what happens when you get into politics.
Yeah.
Somebody's
got to win.
Somebody's got to win. And because somebody has to win, there's a lot of people losing. And what we're talking about here today, I think victims are losing.
Yeah,
for sure. So we kind of, especially when we get into things, man, that we get passionate about, we'll just go on and on.
No, I love it, man. I love it.
And I don't want you to not have any words in. So, man, so throw some stuff at us on what your organization is thinking, or, let's talk, we talked about the problem. Let's talk about let's brainstorm some ideas on some solutions. Tell us about what your organization is kind of pushing, what you guys think is the right angle to attack this thing, and eventually,
and
it's this repeat.
And what is the name of your organization too?
Yes, our organization is the Alliance for Safety and Justice. So we are a multi-state, a public safety organization where our goal is to end mass incarceration and build, a different justice system around this idea around shared safety, right? Of what you all just talked about, and really investing in the solutions that actually keep communities safe: crime prevention, community health, mental health, substance abuse treatment, prevention, rehabilitation, reentry program. So our goal as an organization is to reduce the over-reliance on the justice system to keep our communities safe and to help victims, but instead actually invest in the evidence-based solutions that we know that we know stop the cycle of violence. So the Alliance for Safety and Justice is kind of like, as I described, like our parent company, right? But as part of that work, so we're a team of organizers. We run legislative campaigns. We run ballot campaigns. We have a marketing and communications. We do research. But at the heart of our organization are our members. So through our organization, we have about 500,000 members. So we have about 230,000 members through our Crime Survivors for Safety and Justice program. So this is our national network of crime victims across the country that are coming together to share their stories, right, to heal together, also to advocate for a better justice system that prioritizes rehabilitation, prevention, and recovery over more incarceration. So that's like one part of our organization is crime victims. The other part of our organization is called our Time Done program. So our Time Done program is our other membership network, over 270,000 people who are living with old criminal records, right? So we bring together crime victims, and we bring together people with old records, right? And through our work these past decade or so, we see those two constituencies are often the same, right? You have people with records who I've mentioned have been victims of a crime before, right? You have survivors who've been victims, may have come in contact with the justice system as well. So we believe that we actually be able to elevate the people who are most harmed by the justice system, that are most harmed by violence. We bring them together, we organize them, and we train them to be organizers, and we train them to be advocates, and we train them to shift the narrative in the media about who victims are, who people with records are, and what are their safety solutions. And we bring them to state capitals all across the country to change policies. And as an organization, we've been, we don't like to boast about all of our work, but I am, right? Because it's important to really uplift.
Oh, go for it. Boast all day, man.
Shout it out.
Yeah.
Shout it out.
Organization, right? So,
it.
so the last, we've been able to pass over 100 reforms all across the country. These are like legislative campaigns, administrative reforms, budget for, so over 100 reforms we've been able to pass across the country. And the impact of those reforms is, one, we've been able to move about $3 billion out of the justice system into those safety solutions that I mentioned: reentry programs, community violence intervention, trauma recovery, mental health, youth programs, substance abuse treatment. So we've been able to move about $3 billion out of the justice system into communities for those evidence-based safety solutions that are, we know, to prevent crime from happening in the first place. In addition to that, we've passed reforms that either expunge or expunge or being able to help people seal their records. So we've been able to about 13 million people across the country are now eligible to have their record either expunged or sealed, right? So what that looks like is providing people who are coming out of the justice system with the opportunity for economic stability, right? Being able to get them access to housing, jobs, but many people who have records face a lot of barriers. So we've been able to pass reforms that allow up to 13 million people, right, to now be able to get their records changed. In addition to that, we strongly believe, especially as victims, that you all said earlier that most people who are in the justice system, they're coming home one day, right? Most people who are incarcerated have a date when they're coming home, whether that's 5 months, 10 years, 20 years, 60 years, they're coming home one day. And we want them to come home back, and they come home back into our families, back into our communities. We want them to come home better than they were before. Right. So some of the reforms that we work on is called something like, earned credit or like productivity credits. Basically, what those type of programs are is that, we want to incentivize people who are incarcerated to complete programming, right? Education programs, drug treatment programs, life skills programs, mental health programs. So we want to incentivize you while you're incarcerated to take these programs and complete these programs, and then you will be eligible to get credits on your sentence that will allow you to come home a little bit sooner. Maybe it's 30 days sooner, right? Maybe it's 60 days sooner. So just incentivize the people who are incarcerated to complete these programs so that they could potentially come home sooner. So we work on those type of reforms across the country. As I mentioned, communities that are most harmed by crime and violence, those communities are least supported by the justice system, are least supported by victim services. I traveled the country. Places like East St. Louis, Illinois, which is about 3 hours from Chicago, a city of only 69 blocks, high rates of crime and violence, have been one of the most violent cities for decades. Places like Newark, New Jersey. I'll talk about Newark in a few, but like I traveled to Los Angeles, Detroit, Miami. These communities for decades have been having high rates of crime and violence in communities. And one thing that I've learned, and one thing that we've learned through our work, is that there isn't a place for people to go to actually get victim services or mental health support after they experience trauma, right? Whether that's related to gun violence or domestic violence or sexual assault in communities, especially in communities of color, most people don't have a place to go to actually get counseling, actually get mental health. And so one thing that we've been able to do is we've been able to expand a trauma recovery center model. So a trauma recovery center is basically like a hospital for counseling and therapy, right? And so victims of violent crime can be able to go and walk into a trauma recovery center and say, I've been a victim of a violent crime. I need help, right? And they offer you counseling, therapy. They help you with, getting you back to work. They help you with other social services that you may need. And that model is really about building the infrastructure of victim services in community. So we started with like one of these trauma recovery centers. Now we have 52 of these trauma recovery centers and growing. We need a trauma recovery center in every community, especially there in Dallas as well, which we're working with Dallas Methodist to bring the city the first trauma recovery center as well. So those are like some of the policies that we work on about, reducing our expenditures on the justice system and reinvesting back into communities, helping victims get support and helping people coming out of the justice system being able to access housing and jobs. So we've been very successful this past decade, and it's because we are organizers. We are organizing people on the ground to change policies.
Aswad, that's some really amazing stuff, man. So did you start the organization, or are you because you're the vice president, right?
Yeah, I'm currently the vice president. I have a dual role. So I'm the vice president of the organization at the Alliance for Safety and Justice. I also serve as the national director of our Crime Survivors for Safety and Justice program. So I didn't found the organization. Our president, her name is Lenore Anderson. Been in this work for decades. She co-founded the organization with Robert Rooks. Robert Rooks is currently the CEO of Reform Alliance. And so the two of them founded our organization back in 2012. And they founded the organization at first, which was to help the state of California reduce its prison population. And so that's what the kind of the original theory of, organization that could help the state reduce its prison population and invest in those safety solutions that I've mentioned. We were successful in California by passing Proposition 47 in 2014. And then in 2016, we were asked to, using very similar strategies that we did in California, we're asked to take our organization to other states. And that's where I joined to help build this crime survivor movement across the country that's now 200,000 strong.
So what can, man, I could get behind that. Like, what can we do, and maybe those that are listening do to get involved? And I got your number. I'll certainly be in touch with you after this podcast. There's no doubt, especially now, man. I've really enjoyed this, but I would say more so now, like for our listeners, what can people do to get behind this? I feel like mindset is one, especially, those that work in the legal system. I feel like, and that's what our conversation is about today. I feel like mindset is definitely a big thing, man, because I can tell you, prior to 2020, 2021, I didn't have this mindset. And it saddens me, that I went so long and didn't understand all of this. But what can our listeners do, like, to get involved and help you guys?
Yeah, for me, it's a great question. I'm always, I really appreciate this conversation too, y'all. Like, this was, I was looking forward to this podcast. And I think I enjoyed it more. So I appreciate you all opportunity to be on with you all. I think number one is like these type of conversations, right? Being able to, like, we have to listen to crime victims. We have to listen to the people that are most harmed by crime and violence, and having them be at the center of public policy. Right? Why we have failed this country, why we have, the foundational problem with our justice system and our crime policy is because we actually haven't listened to victims. We haven't listened to what safety looks like to them. When you talk to most victims, and I talk to thousands of victims, we survey thousands of victims. Most victims, believe the justice system isn't working for them. Most victims don't get victims' rights. Most victims, don't feel like, the justice system should just be locking people up and throwing away the key. And these are victims of domestic violence. These are victims of sexual assault. These are victims who have lost loved ones to homicide. Many of us, prefer that the justice system that we focus on preventing crime from happening in the first place, and then focus on more shorter sentences and rehabilitation. Right. So number one thing is like, being able to listen to victims about what they think safety is, and being able to listen to their stories and experience, and being able to just show that dignity and that respect, and having victims be at the center of public policy. The second thing that's coming to mind for me is our organization. Our organization, we've only been around since 2012. Still a new organization. We work in states primarily in states like California, Arizona, Florida, Texas, Michigan, Ohio, Pennsylvania. If any of our listeners are out there in those states, you can go to our website at the Alliance for Safety and Justice.org. You could join us. You can become a member. You can become an ally. You can help us advocate with policymakers. You can help use your influence in relationships to uplift these safety solutions that we know that prevent crime from happening. So you can go to our website, allianceforsafetyandjustice.org, or you can go to the Crime Survivors for Safety and Justice.org website, which is cssj.org, or you can go to our Time Done website, which is timedone.org. So that's the second thing, is like, join us, go to our website, become a member, become a supporter of our work, or participate in legislative campaigns. And we have legislative bills in all of those states that I've mentioned. The third thing I would mention is that, this is a very important election year for this country. In our organization, we are a bipartisan organization. We work across the aisle, and we are proud of the work that we do with Republicans and also with Democrats as well. We work with anybody that believes in safety. We work with anybody that believes in changing our justice system. We work with anybody that believes in listening to crime victims as well. So this is a very important election year. And as part of that, our organization, and I'm excited to share that we are hosting the first ever Crime Survivors Speak March on Washington, D.C., September 23rd and 24th. And so on those days, thousands of survivors, advocates, community-based organizations. We need law enforcement also to join us to help advocate for these solutions in Washington, D.C., September 23rd and 24th. 24th, we're going to have our big action day right there on the National Mall. And so if you want to join us, call in all survivors, call in all advocates, organizations. If you want a better justice system, join us in Washington, D.C., so we can make sure that our voices are heard, not only at the local, state, but also at the federal level of what safety looks like to us. So join us in DC, and we're excited about this huge movement that we are building to help set this vision around all crime victims should have a right to heal. And that's what we're going to be calling for, which is this right to heal in a new approach to public safety. So join us in DC.
I got a question. I don't know a lot about it, obviously, but I know, for example, say I worked a homicide or a major aggravated assault case or whatever, and there were times that I knew something called crime victims compensation existed. And I knew that it was at the DA's office, and I knew that all we were supposed to do,
give the pamphlet,
give a little pamphlet, say, hey, call these people. We were never trained further than that. Talk about that, the crime victims programs, and I know it probably, it may vary from state to state. I don't know. I'm not educated enough on that, but something you said earlier made me want to ask you about that. Are those programs not being utilized properly or enough, or are they not funded enough? Talk about that, because I'm sure you probably know more about that than I do.
Yeah, all of the above, right? And one, I appreciate you sharing your experience as relates to victim compensation from a law enforcement perspective, right? And I haven't heard a police officer say, yes, I've heard that we just give them the brochure, the pamphlet, right? We may say, hey, you can go to the district attorney's office, but what I haven't heard that you all haven't been trained, right, in helping people to access that. So I appreciate you sharing that. So every state have a victim compensation program. So the victim compensation program is funded by the Crime Victims Fund at the federal level, and then there's resources distributed to each state to run its crime victim compensation program. So in kind of like, high level in theory, the crime victim compensation program is kind of known as like the payer of last resort, right? So if you are a victim like myself, as a victim of gun violence, say if I didn't have any health insurance, right? And what happened in my case, I had huge medical bills. I had this I will never forget this $929 ambulance bill that followed me for years on my credit report. Also, I couldn't work at the time. Also, I needed counseling and therapy. I didn't have the resources to pay for counseling and therapy. So the victim compensation program, if you can't pay for things like counseling, if you can't pay for housing relocation support, at times some states allow it, some states don't. If you can't, if there's a crime that happened in your home, you need to change your locks on your doors. If you need help with funeral and burial expenses, you need help with covering your lost wages because you were a victim and you can't go to work. So there's a program that exists that helps cover those expenses, right? So in theory, this program is a great program, right, to help crime victims get access to the support services that they need. But there are significant barriers with this program, and I'm just going to highlight a few of them. Number one, as you mentioned, most victims don't know about the program. When I was a victim, I never was made aware of the victim compensation program. Most victims don't know about the victim compensation program, and 96%, don't access the program. So that's one challenge, is that the awareness that this program actually exists. Another barrier that exists is actually what's in the policies vary by each state, which also makes it challenging. That there are some policy barriers that prevent people from even accessing the program. So if you find out about the program, in a lot of states, there are these time limits, right? These time limits that exist and say you must file a police report within 72 hours of a crime in order to be eligible for the victim compensation program.
Wow, I didn't know that.
It's like most states is like that time limit that exists for you to file that police report, right? Most victims, most gun violence, there's a police report, majority of them associated with it, right? But when it comes to things like domestic violence or sexual assault, people don't report those crimes, right? So in order to be eligible, in most states, you got to file that police report within a certain amount of days, right? Whether it's 48 hours or 72 hours or maybe 3 or 5
Sounds
days.
like a terrible policy.
Yeah, exactly. Sounds like a terrible policy. So that's one barrier, right? So walk will be here. So if you meet that threshold there, right, in most states, maybe you only have a year or 2 or 3 to apply for the program after you became a victim, right? Once again, most victims don't know about the program, right? So in my case, I didn't find out about the program till 9 years later. Say that third year, and I needed a lot of counseling, a lot of therapy, which I did. In the state that I was living in, I could not access the compensation program because the time limit, the window, the years that I needed to apply, I didn't apply for. So there's these time limits that exist that provide significant barriers for people accessing the program, because I got to file a police report, I got to submit the application within this time window, right? So I just highlight 2 more. Another barrier that exists is for in some states, if you are on probation or parole, some states, if you owe fines and fees, you may not be eligible for the victim compensation program, even though you were a victim, right? You're not eligible for the program as well. Yep, go ahead.
If you basically, if you made a mistake in life and had interaction with the criminal justice system. And then later on, you were victimized.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, but we won't help you.
Correct.
I don't know why I'm laughing. That's not funny. It's ridiculous.
That seems like a simple, easy. That seems like we could look at these barriers, right, that you just listed off. The ones you just listed off to me.
Yep.
That's the first one I could say day one, done. That doesn't exist. A victim is a victim. Right? Because that goes back to what we've been talking about this entire time, the psycho-violence. Most of your victims are going to be people who have had violence. Oh my gosh. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to cut you off, man, but like that's wild.
Yeah, it is. No, and that's real, right? That's real. So I just give you one real life example. And this is like part of our work because we work with victims every day, right? And we talk to victims across the country. We hear these stories, right? We see these barriers, but also what we do, we train our victims to be advocates for them to run legislative campaigns to change it, right? So just example in Ohio, in the state of Ohio, we passed a law in 2021, but in Ohio, if you were a victim, you had a felony record, you cannot access the victim compensation program, right? So there was a young man who was tragically shot and killed, and that young man had a felony record, I think from 9 years ago, something like that. Like about 9 years ago. He lost his life. The mom now have to take care of his 2 children. The mom went to apply for victim compensation to help with funeral burial expenses, to help with counseling for the kids. She was denied, right? Because the deceased individual had that felony record. Right. So huge barrier that existed. So what we did was, we ran a campaign. We had direct communication with the Attorney General's office. And within the next session, we were able to change that law. Right. So we removed that felony look back policy that existed in the state of Ohio. So a lot of states where there are barriers, we're actually running campaigns or have passed campaigns to make some of these changes. So that's like one. There's like another barrier that, I can go on and on, y'all, of all of the barriers that exist from people actually accessing this compensation program.
Why do you think that is? Like, why do you think? Is it a way to save funds? Is it a way
to not have to fund it more so that we can put money somewhere else? Sorry, I didn't mean to
go ahead.
I didn't mean to cut you off. This is I know nothing about this, right? But like I'm going to come to the conclusion where one could come to the conclusion that I'll give you an example. I pulled up some numbers. I pulled up numbers the other day. Because one thing is, let's be honest, we're in a southern state in Texas, right? So when you start talking about funding other things in this country, clearly money is just intangible in these days, but you're only going to have so much allocated funds. So if you want to fund another program with more money to solve a problem, well, I'm sorry, but you're going to have to rob Peter to pay Paul, right? When you start talking about moving money around in the criminal justice system, what is the first thing that's going to come to somebody's mind? You're trying to defund the police. No. Yeah, you are. You're going to cut their budget this year. Well, maybe I take $1 million out of that. Maybe I take $1 million out of New York City's $5.75 billion yearly police department budget. No, get it. Right? So No, I mean, yeah. New York, City Council. Yeah. Chicago's is 2 billion. So maybe I take $1 million to move somewhere else. It doesn't mean I'm defunding the police. It means I'm going to take this money and maybe hire some advocates, or put some money in this program, put some money in that program. Let's stop responding to the problem. Let's try to tackle the problem on the front end. That's going to take money. I'm sorry, I'm going to have to rob Peter to pay Paul to do that. I'm not defunding the police, but I'm going to try to put some money elsewhere. And then, we take funds and we put it in a victim advocate type program, doing what your organization is doing. Who's to say that we don't take some of that money and then we turn around and we make a mandated victims advocacy, mandated training for law enforcement? I'm not defunding law enforcement. I'm taking that money and I'm creating a training program to provide to law enforcement so they can be better officers out there in the street, so they know how to be compassionate. They know how to come at different situations with a heart, so that we solve the problem on the front end. Let's stop responding to the problem after it happens. Just kind of, that was just a piggyback there. But a lot of people think when you start talking about moving money in the criminal justice system that we're defunding something. Well, maybe that's not immediately it, right? Let's stop being so close-minded. Let's listen to where we're going to put that money. I don't know if you guys have ran into that problem or that been some of the pushback, we don't have that funding because we got to do this or that.
Yeah, and that's not definitely one of the challenges is that, think about, just the need for victim services at the federal level. VOCA, which is the Victims of Crime Act, potentially being cut almost 40%, right?
Who cut that?
Victims are potentially being cut, right? Which is, a lot of victim service providers are having to close their doors, lay off staff. And so there's our investments in victim services there's a lot of challenges, like how we're looking at addressing crime and violence and helping victims. We see continually decreases in funding for victims, right, while we continue to invest, if not more, in law enforcement, right? So yes, you definitely highlighted one issue. I think why that is because of the funding. We're taking money from victims to invest more in incarceration. I think the second thing that's coming to mind for me is, and we all work, in the criminal justice system in some way. For those who are listening out there, you've heard about the racial disparities, right, that exist in the criminal justice system, right? Black men and black women being incarcerated.
It's real. Yeah, it's real. People who say it's not, they're idiots. People do have biases. It's a real thing, and that's don't even get me started on that. I'll get fired up on that alone. But yeah, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, no, it's a real thing, right? And also, I think what's important to understand and recognize is that the same racial disparity that exists in the criminal justice system, those same racial disparities that exist in victim services as well, right? Like your race and your socioeconomic status has everything to do with which victims actually get help and which victims don't, right? I come from
you come from such and such neighborhood, so you must have brought this on yourself. I could see that being a thing.
Yeah, it's very real. Like most crime victims, especially Black men and Black women, do not access victim services. So there are a lot of racial disparities that exist in victim services, right? There are a lot of racial disparities that exist about who's actually a crime victim, right? Many of us aren't even seen as victims, right? Which is why, we're not informed about the victim compensation program, right? Whether it's in our public health systems, whether it's with the justice system, whether it's, with service providers, like we're not seen as victims, even though we in our community experience repeat victimization and have been experiencing that for a decade. I think that's the other main issue that exists is the racial disparities that we have to uplift just as we do in the justice system, because most people of color who have been victims aren't seen as victims, and most of us don't access any victim services. What that contributes to is this continued cycle of violence that we have in our communities, and why we need to really invest more in this infrastructure of community violence intervention, this infrastructure of mental health and trauma recovery center to help, stop cycles of violence.
I agree with you. To me, it's just investing in that is just as important in investing in, in law enforcement, in the judicial process, in the DA's offices, in the sheriff's offices.
Mm-hmm.
Because here's the thing, like we see we see the result of investing more in one over the other.
Yeah. So why not?
Right.
Let's try the other.
Yeah. So how about we go, okay, well, maybe if we at least start out equally or something, or, I mean, there's so many angles that you could do. There's so many approaches that you could take. I think what your organization is just, man, I'm so glad we had this conversation. I honestly, I didn't have time to do a whole lot of, back end research. I think Justin sent me over some info like your bio and stuff. I hadn't looked into the organization, but man, I'm freaking loving it. And, honestly want to be a part of this, because what you guys are doing is attacking our problem that we have in society from a different angle. And who's to say that it just you said you guys have passed 100 reforms, right?
Mm-hmm.
God, man, 5 of those worked, right? Like, we're not going to always get it. We're not going to always get it right. But if 5 of those worked, was it worth it? Then because it either prevented a victim, or prevented. Well, I mean, it prevented both. So, I mean, why not? It's better. It's better than what we're doing, because in my opinion, what we're doing is not working, and that's on a national level. That's on an outlook on society as a whole.
But why? This is what bothers me about what you're saying. Why in the hell do these people not realize that this is not working? We've done it for decades and decades and decades, and police, and police. We need more police. We need more police.
But it's not just police. You got to talk about the lady we talked to from New York. Tackling the correctional side of this freaking monster is a whole nother level, right? Like on the correctional, like it's just
everything's attached and connected. If you got a problem here, it's a domino effect. You got a problem here. If you got a problem here, that domino is going to hit this domino. But we're not starting. What I don't think we're focusing on in this entire process, the criminal justice system in general, as a whole, with the problems in law enforcement, the problems in the judicial system, the problems in correctional facility. The thing that we do not sit back and just ask ourselves, what's justice for the victim? And that's something that, I do have this conversation with officers. And it's something that I firmly believe in. I'm a big spirit of the law guy. I don't think everything's black and white. One, because I'll just be quite honest with you. I do not agree with a lot of the laws that we have across the country. I think that we can start solving a lot of issues by reforming the actual freaking penal codes in these states of what's against the law. It's a whole different topic, but I always try to tell officers, your justice is going to be different from mine. I go back to when you were talking to me, when you were telling your story about, sitting down and talking to the DA, and the DA informing you that they had this kid was facing 40 years, and you basically had to ask a couple of times, can you just ask him if he'd take a plea? Just one more time. And, at the end of the day, because
You were the victim of that crime. That was your justice. 6 to
Yep.
10 was your justice. To me, as a law enforcement officer or somebody who works in the criminal justice system, hey man, if you're good with it, I'm good with it. Right? It didn't happen to me. I'm here to serve you. I'm just a vehicle. You know? So justice is going to be different for everybody. And I think the piece that we're missing here is sitting down and asking the victims, what's justice look like for you? You know, if we just sat down and we talked to every victim of a crime in this nation, we did some, a huge study. I mean, it's impossible to do probably, but if we did that and we asked them, hey, you were a victim of theft, or you were a victim of assault or gun violence or family violence. What I know this was the outcome, but what was the justice you were really looking for? You're going to get all this data, right? You're going to get a bunch of different answers, but I promise you'll be able to look at it and find a common theme. Instead of just having one group of people saying, well, if you steal $2,000 worth of stuff from Target, then that's 6 months in jail. No questions asked, right? And, you can do a whole lot of what ifs, and biases can come into play if we put this thing back on the people. But here's the thing. This entire system wouldn't exist without the people.
Yep.
Right? That's what it's here for, is to serve the people. And I just think we're failing at talking to the people that it's impacting. And that's the victims and the people that, have to answer for the mistakes they make in life. So... sorry I got on another tangent, but I just get fired up over this stuff, man. It's not hard, it's not hard to have a heart, to care.
Yeah.
Just freaking care about people. If you're going to be in this profession, if you're going to work in the criminal justice system, if you're going to try to change things, you're going to try to influence others, you're 50% of the way there if you just freaking care.
Yeah.
And don't fake it. Just freaking care. Just actually care. Like it would affect you or your family members. Just care. It's freaking simple. But we just don't do it.
We're getting there. Right? We're getting there. And I think the most important thing is you got to listen to the victim, right? Listen to the victim, what they want. I think when you do that, and that's why I'm so excited about this March on Washington in September. Right, it's like bringing thousands of victims. We've been successful at the local level. Now we're going to national. Right, here's what victims are saying, and here is our new approach to safety. Right, at the national level, and so it's going to be important for us to continue to really listen to the victim and listen to what justice and accountability looks like for them. And across the spectrum, you're going to hear we want more restorative justice programs. Right, we want to talk to the person that caused us harm or caused our loved one harm. We actually don't want someone to be sentenced to a long-term sentence. We actually want more shorter prison sentences. We want prosecutors to focus on solving neighborhood issues, right? We want more investments in violence intervention programs, more investment in mental health and drug treatment, more youth programs. Like when you actually talk to victims, the solutions are there. We just have to do a better job actually listening to the people who's impacted by these issues. And that's something that we often don't do when it comes to our policy makers as well.
Yeah, you're right, and I will say, Justin knows this. I've been planning a trip to DC for like 4 months.
Man, I was just sitting here thinking when he said DC, I was like, maybe that's when we need to go. Honestly,
I've been looking at trying to go to DC for like 4 months. And
we both wanted to go, and it was his idea, and I was like, man, we should. I'd love to go there and like host a podcast, and. And you brought that up. I was like, man, maybe that's a good time to go
do something alive.
Yeah,
we have to. Man, we're gonna have to stay in touch. I think, I always say, man, one of the most important things in life in general is the relationships that you build.
Yeah,
and I believe that things happen for a reason. And I'm glad that we got a chance to talk. We got a chance to hear your story. You got a chance to listen to me rant. That's always good. But having and building these relationships, that's how you influence change. And so I look forward to continuing to do that.
Yeah, moving yourself out of the way for the greater good of the system. And it's amazing to meet people like you, Aswad, who are in the fight. And that's what we I can tell you, Failing Justice, the podcast, the organization, it's shifted. When I first started this podcast, I was pissed off, and because of if you go back and listen to my early episodes, man, I had some corruption and stuff that I dealt with, but we have really transitioned and learned so much along the way, and I'm thankful to, like Preston said, to meet you, hear your story, and to have a relationship with you, because no one person can do it alone. You got to have so many people get in the fight, and love what you're doing with your organization. And thank you for taking the time to I know it took us a couple weeks to get these details finalized, but for taking the time for investing in us and our show and our audience and educating us, because I can tell you, I learned a lot from you in this conversation today, and it makes me. It's been several weeks since we've been in the studio, and this was the episode for me to kind of light a fire under me to get back in, and so we appreciate that. And everything you do. And real quick before we go, if you would drop those websites one more time so people can look those up.
Yeah, no, thank you all so much for having me on. It's been a great conversation. Yes, let's continue to stay in touch. I'm looking forward to coming on the show again, right, in the near future as well. So our organization, the Alliance for Safety and Justice, you go to allianceforsafetyandjustice.org, all one word. If you are a crime survivor or interested in our Crime Survivors for Safety and Justice program, you can go to cssj.org. If you are living with an old criminal record, have a loved one living with an old criminal record that face the over 40,000 legal barriers that exist, if you have a record, you can go to our Time Done program at timedone.org.
All right. Aswad, man, we appreciate you so much. And, man, keep doing the good work, stay in the fight, and I'm sure we'll be in touch again soon.
Sounds good. Y'all too. We're all in it together to improve this system. Nice to meet y'all too.
Absolutely.
That was great. Really, really informative for me, and I hope that everybody listening too picked up on that, and especially those in the legal system that are dealing with victims, and even those who have committed crimes. Like, it's nothing we haven't said before, or even today, but just really, just like I tell my kids, like, stop and really think about what you're doing. And I think it's, that applies here too, when dealing with this, because this is so important, man. We're talking about people's lives, their freedoms, their health, their mental health, their futures. And so that was great. I really enjoyed that.
Yeah, man, I'm glad we had the conversation, and I sit here and think about it, and I'm like, even in our profession, in law enforcement, and then I'm sure in the judicial system as well, and corrections, like, I don't really think it's a problem of getting the majority of people in these professions behind these changes, and it's getting the message out there and having those conversations, right? Because I don't think I know any cop that right now that would have had that conversation that we just did and would have been like, no, none of that's going to work. All of them would be like, yeah, I agree. Like, the cycle of violence is real. I've seen it time and time again. Absolutely. Yeah. Like, I wish I had more information on victim.
That's it.
Advocate.
I just don't think most of them understand.
No, we don't know, dude.
I didn't understand. There's a lot of stuff he said today that I had no idea.
I mean, last time somebody talked to me about victims compensation, the fund that's there, that I really don't even, know how hard, or, I mean, clearly there's a lot of obstacles and I got problems with that. So the legislatures that listen, need to know that a victim is a victim, and our entire reason of existence, the reason we have jobs, is to serve people. And if we're going to continue to make things harder on people that we're serving, then eventually they're going to take us out of our jobs. Mm-hmm. So if you like what you do, you like making a good impact, then let's start listening to people that our decisions impact the most. And that, a good majority of that is the victim. So some of these barriers that he was talking about, I don't know if Texas has them. I'm sure we have some, but that's got to change, man.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think how can you sit there and say, 15 years ago when I was in my, early 20s, young teens, I completely screwed up and got wrapped up in the law. And now I've moved on. I'm a productive member of society. And then I walk into 7-Eleven, down here on Pacific Street in Dallas, and somebody, takes a gun to me and shoots me. Either I live or die. But either way, if I die, you're telling me my family cannot get victim. That's the most absurd thing that I heard today, and maybe this week. That really blows my mind, because I didn't know. I had no idea that was a thing, man. And you're right.
They hadn't talked about that. To me, since I was in the police academy, I know for a fact, and I tell you even more. The thing I remember the most about victims' rights and victims' compensation, and I give a shout out to my first patrol sergeant. I'm not going to say his name on here because people don't like me to drop their names like that, but he knows who he is, because he was my first patrol sergeant on night shift. And let's just say he was very, very strict. Mm-hmm. To this day, when somebody says the word victims' rights or victims' compensation, I remember having the conversation with him. So sergeants out there working, you do not understand the influence you have on the officers that you lead, and how long they will remember those things. But that's honestly the most in-depth conversation I've had in my entire career about victims advocacy stuff. So
yeah, I agree, man.
It's crazy.
And before we go, you're probably not gonna like this, but I have to give a shout out to you because I'm proud of you. This guy is getting promoted to lieutenant officially tomorrow at his agency, and I want to say, I'm damn proud of the work that you've done. I've seen, I've told you this before, but I've seen your growth, personally and professionally, so much over the last 5 years, 3 to 5 years, and I just I won't say a lot about it, because when we try to keep a lot of stuff out of the shows that has to do with our agencies, but I do want to say that I do got to give you props for that. It's well deserved, and definitely proud of you, man. Just and you're doing good work. You're doing damn good work, especially continuing to do this show and have these conversations and bring these changes to law enforcement, not only in Texas but across the country. And like Aswad said, I mean, and said it time and time again, it literally starts at places like this. And so I'm glad that you're part of this show, part of this organization, and really, really happy, and congratulations on your promotion.
I appreciate that, man. It still doesn't feel like a reality. Just because of, my man, I've had a wild, fast career.
Yeah.
And, I guess what I would say is looking back, and to officers out there, people who are aspiring to be in leadership positions in organizations, if I had to give, because because I kind of think my career path is kind of unheard of. I mean, it's pretty accelerated. I think I would say that if you strive every day to be a leader in the organization and put everyone else above your own ambitions, and you commit to being a servant leader, it might not seem like it's going to pay off. It might be exhausting. You'll make tons of sacrifices, personally, professionally, and with your family, but it will pay off eventually. And even if you don't reach the leadership level that you want to, it doesn't mean that you won't have made an impact on that organization. So just, stick with it, because it does happen if you just stick to the fundamentals of, you're there to serve. And when you step into leadership roles and organizations and law enforcement, your mission becomes serving the officers so that they can serve, the community. It's not you out there answering the 911 calls. It's not you out there responding at 3:00 in the morning. It's your officers. So just, put them first, serve them, and it pays off. I feel like that's the kind of the route I chose to go. And I will say that, I'm extremely grateful to have the honor of serving in a leadership role in my organization and the officers that have chosen to work for our org, because it is a choice, and it's one of the greatest honors thus far in my career. So, and I appreciate the kind words.
Yeah, absolutely, man. And I just want to thank everybody for tuning in to the show. It was great to get back in the studio. We had a little bit of a lapse. There's been so much going on. And I'll release more details on that at a later time. But we are just, we're grateful to be sitting here to bring these conversations here. And it's all just for, we're not getting paid to do this. So, it's all just to try and bring a change to a system that we're passionate about. And so we just want to thank all of you for tuning in and listening. And remember, failingjustice.org and all social medias are Failing One Justice, the number one justice. So everybody have a safe week, and thanks for tuning in.
Stay safe.
It's not just an organization, it's a call to action. Join us on this journey, satisfaction. Dismantle barriers, build with passion. For a future where justice is not a fraction. Yeah, failing justice. Yeah, failing justice. Yeah, failing justice. Failing justice. Failing justice.